All of life is a story. That's all we have. So when people ask me, is it real? I say yes, because for me, story is the only reality that exists. I pray to my ancestors. In the beginning, it was their folk tales, the cuentos that they told. The sense of story that I have and that I write comes from the community, comes from the people, comes from those ancestors.
I grew up in believing in curanderas.
Chupacabra is a monster, mythological, maybe real.
Superstition? I don't know. I've seen things. I was raised on an Apache reservation, and I've seen some things that would scare the hell out of you.
Anaya is a myth maker. He understands myth, not as some kind of scholastic historical phenomenon, but as a living system of knowledge.
He's not so much a magical realist as he is a realistic magician.
He deserves to be known as, you know, a grand old man or whatever of the writing universe.
Mythmaker, magician, grand old man of the writing universe. Author Rodolfo Anaya is best known for introducing readers to the unique landscapes and characters of New Mexico. His first novel, published in 1972, was a coming-of-age story about a young New Mexican boy guided into the world by a curandera, or traditional healer. Bless Me Ultima put New Mexico on the literary map and gave birth to Anaya's prolific writing career, which has included a steady and diverse flow of novels, short stories, mysteries, plays, epic poems, and children's books. His work has earned him national attention, such as the 1971 Premio Quinto Sol Literary Award and the 2001 Presidential Medal of Arts. Yet his affinity for La Raza, the people, and La Tierra, the land, have earned him an honorary place in the humble hearts of New Mexicans.
What is it I remember about the first stirrings of my imagination? I pause and listen, and I hear the wind blowing across the empty stretches of the plains of eastern New Mexico. This harsh but strangely beautiful land is my home.
Like the character Antonio in his novel Bless Me Ultima, Anaya comes from eastern New Mexico, a landscape of farming valleys, ancient lakes, and the llano, a vast stretch of never-ending plains.
His name was Rafael, and he lived on a ranch in the lonely and desolate llano. The people whispered that the silence of the llano had taken Rafael's soul, and they respected his right to live alone. The people of this country knew the loneliness of the llano. They realized that sometimes the silence of the endless plain grew so heavy and oppressive that it became unbearable. They knew that after many days of riding alone under the burning sun and listening only to the moaning wind, a man could begin to talk to himself. When a man heard the sound of his voice in the silence, he sensed the danger in his lonely existence. That's a tour de force of writing. There's very, very little dialogue. The silence of the llano. I share with Rudy, we both grew up on the llano. Mine was over in Texas, but we share a feeling for the landscape. And this story is very powerful. The landscape actually becomes the leading character, you might say.
In the small village of my birth, Pastura, why do I remember the dim light the kerosene lamps cast on the adobe walls? Why do I remember the voices of the old women of the village as they visited my mother in her kitchen, drank coffee, smoked cigarettes, talked about the impending birth? If I am to be a writer, it is the ancestral voices of these people who will form a part of my quest.
Born to a vaquero or cowboy and a farmer's daughter, Rudolfo was encouraged to be a priest as his mother desired, or follow his father's ways of the llano. Yet the cuentos, or stories told around kitchen tables and among childhood friends, captured his imagination and shaped a different destiny.
That's a family story that my mother used to tell when I was still a baby crawling around the floor, that she put a sheepskin on the floor, nice and soft, and then around the edges my father put a saddle because he had been quite a cowboy. Probably other people might have put different things, maybe a guitar if I was going to be a musician, and my mother put a paper and pencil. And the story is that I crawled to the paper and the pencil, so I left the life of the rip-roaring cowboy behind and never became a musician, but I did become a writer.
Anayas Bless Me Ultima revisits the struggle of destiny and identity through the experiences of a Mexican-American boy making sense of a post-World War II world in rural New Mexico.
After experimenting with poetry and a few novels, I thought that I should go back and write a kind of autobiographical story about growing up in a small town. And so I chose a boy much like me. I named him Antonio and began to write about him and his family and what he does, going to school and going to church and all the adventures that he has fishing along the river and meeting the kids.
We didn't have baseball bats, or we had, if somebody had a basketball, or somebody had a football, or somebody had a baseball and a bat, we were lucky to play. But we'd play. Cowboys and Indians was the big thing. Of course, I always ended up being an Indian, you know, and getting killed. But we'd play in the river, fish. We'd go fishing. We'd go rabbit hunting. But most of the time, the kids in this part of the country here, where we were in this neighborhood, he lived right across the river here. We spent our time in the river playing, you know, until it got dark, and then we'd get the hell out of there. Yeah.
What happens after dark?
Oh, look, are you kidding? You wouldn't get caught down there. La Llorona would get you.
La Llorona, the tortured ghost of a woman who haunts rivers, is one of many characters found in traditional New Mexican folktales. These stories gave life to the landscapes of Rudolfo's childhood, places where playful boys were warned of spirits, sirens, and brujas, or witches.
Oye, Tony, is it true what they say? Is there a bruja in your chante? A bruja? Hell no. My father said she cursed someone, and 3 days later, that person turned into a frog. Knock it off, you guys. Are we going to play or not? Red pleaded. Oye, Tony, do you do magic? Horse threw a hold around my neck and locked me in a half Nelson. Do magic? Horse grunted in my ear. His half Nelson was tight, and my stomach felt sick. The heat and what I had just heard made me sick. I bent over and tiré tripas. Tiré tripas is what they call it.
I grew up with a storyteller, a neighborhood storyteller, and she would gather us at night and tell us stories, and that's how we retained our culture, through the storyteller, and Rudolfo and I as a storyteller, and that's how culture has been retained. The other thing too is that I grew up in believing in curanderas, because that's what we had. We had no doctors, so we had to rely on curanderas. And so I relate to Ultima, her herbs, her knowledge of the earth, her knowledge of the environment, her belief in spirits, her connection to the spirits. So all of that is very, very real to me because it's part of what I grew up with.
The spirit that I needed was not there until Ultima appeared. And I tell the story that one night I was writing and she came to my room. I felt something behind me, And I turned, and there was actually a woman there, an old woman. She told me that the story wouldn't work unless she was in it. And people ask me, well, where did you get the name Ultima? And I say, that's what she told me her name was. She came with her name. And once she got into the story, into the novel, that's when that whole sense of place and spirit took hold of me, and I realized that I had to go deeper into the story, that it had to be more than just a growing up story. It had to do with values of the community, with beliefs, with symbolism, with religion, and also with witchcraft.
Papa, I asked, why is there evil in the world? Ay, Antonio, you ask so many questions. Didn't the priest at the church explain? Didn't you read in your catechism? But I would like to know your answer. Oh, well, in that case, well, I will tell you as I see it. I think most of the things we call evil are not evil at all. It is just that we don't understand those things, and so we call them evil. But I took the Holy Communion. I sought understanding. Understanding does not come that easy, Tony. Sometimes it takes a lifetime to acquire understanding, because in the end, understanding simply means having sympathy for people. Ultima has sympathy for people, and it is so complete that with it she can touch their souls and cure them. That is her magic.
It was amazing in 1970 to read Bless Me Ultima. All of us were reading Latin American literature. That was as close as we could get to our own experience as students of literature. And we were reading the Mexican novelists. We were reading the Chilean poets. And finally, here's a voice from this place where we could look in the pages of this novel and see ourselves and feel what it means to be from here.
I think Rudy's book, Bless Me Ultima, I think it really awakened in me a sense of belonging and a sense of pride in who I was, who I am. But it also helped me connect to my culture and to even the stories of my mother and my father and those childhood stories which meant so much to me. My mother had packed a small jar of hot beans and some good green chili wrapped in tortillas. When the other children saw my lunch, they laughed. They showed me their sandwiches, which were made of bread. The pain and sadness seemed to spread to my soul, and I felt for the first time what the grown-ups call la tristeza de la vida. I wanted to run away, to hide, but I knew that if I did, I would shame my family name. I knew I had to grow up and be a man, but oh, it was so very hard.
Becoming a man was the theme of Rodolfo's next two novels, which reflect on events in his teenage years. Heart of Aztlán looks at a rural family's move to the big city, Albuquerque. And Tortuga, or Turtle, mirrors Rodolfo's painful convalescence after a debilitating diving accident.
The novel Tortuga is set in a hospital for crippled and orphaned children, and a lot of the children who are there are victims of polio and are on respirators. And the central character, Tortuga, is a young boy who has undergone a terrible accident, has had his back broken, and is in a very confining cast. Listen carefully, and you'll hear the underground river which flows from Tortuga, Philemon was saying. There are huge caverns beneath the mountain, and through them run powerful rivers, rivers of turtle pee. Yes, that old mountain is alive, a real sea turtle which wandered north when the oceans dried and became deserts. But it's alive, just waiting for another earth change to come along and free it from its prison. and it will happen. The old people told stories that everything comes in cycles, even time itself. So the oceans will return and cover everything as they once did. Then Tortuga will be free. Rudolfo Anaya is not a magical realist in the traditional sense. Rudolfo Anaya doesn't really do that in his books, at least certainly not in this book. In this book, the real mountain is given magical powers by the people who look at it. It doesn't really have magical powers. They invest it with magical powers.
If you're open and you've spent your whole life in the Southwest and you've associated with the earth as Rudy has and as I have, you're going to believe in a lot of things. They become true to you, truer than a concrete wall.
Trees, too, are energized by spirit. Perhaps not the same electric acid that flowed in human nerves, but energized by the earth, sun, and water. The tree lived in a forest of spirits, as the person lived in a community of spirits. Sonny thought of the biblical cry, "Like a cedar I am exalted in Lebanon, like a cypress on Mount Zion, but I am a Nuevo Mexicano, and so like a cottonwood tree I grow in the Rio Grande Valley."
I think he's fascinated by a people, and the people are his people. The people are the Chicanos of New Mexico. He doesn't believe in politics. He doesn't believe in other large geopolitical movements. He believes in individuals.
There were critics at first that said, it's way too pastoral, it's way too rural. Why can't this guy get in the spirit of the rest of the Chicano movement? How come we have to read about these rural settings in mythic New Mexico? What does that have to say about the Chicano experience?
Rudy's just a writer. You know, I hate it when people get put into categories. You know, it's like Rudy is a good writer and whose world, you know, like Faulkner had Yaknakopatawpha County and Rudy has his New Mexico, right? He has the Llano and he has Albuquerque and that kind of thing. And, you know, he's just a good writer.
Early on when I started writing, I had this image of a lake and that I would dive into the lake and in the lake is where I would find the symbols that would make the story powerful. And later on I realized that that lake was my own subconscious. And so the creativity resides a great deal in that subconscious. And for me, the journey of writing has been daring to go into that subconscious, which is can be a scary place.
Anaya admits to struggling with his writing voice in the beginning, including how to bring the idiomatic expression of the Hispano language to American readers. Yet it is his departure from a self-conscious political tone to a more subconscious cultural texture that has characterized his writing style.
Who Killed Don Jose is a murder mystery set on a rancho in New Mexico. And Don Jose is a rich sheep farmer. His daughter Maria, who's home from college, and a sort of sleazy car dealer from Santa Fe named Tony. Maria notices that something's on Don Jose's mind, and he says, "Didn't I tell you? Ramon's delivering my computer tonight." "A computer? He's going to put the whole ranch on a computer program," says Maria, "even the sheep. When most people are planning to retire, he's starting a new project. I tell him to sell the ranch and move to Santa Fe or Albuquerque, but no, the ranch is too important." "Retire?" says Don Jose. "Leave the rancho? My friends, my workers? No, impossible." "You can't be responsible for them all your life," she says. "Por qué no? Our family's been on this land for many generations. Your grandfather taught me to love the land and take care of the workers. He was a real patron." But times have changed, so we change with them. We use computers. Let me get this straight, says Tony. The computer's going to take care of the sheep? Every single borreguito. I'm moving into the future. But nobody's making money in sheep anymore, Tony says. You should get into politics. That's how you make money. Maria says, you could get elected or appointed to a position. Appointed? No. It's men like me who put governors in office in this state. Politicians come to me for votes and advice. I don't go to them. And after they're elected, they're surrounded by the sheep they appoint. At least here on the rancho, my sheep are honest. The play is a good example, along with many of his novels, of how he has never really embraced the traditional themes of Chicano literature as it came out of the great fields of California. He's always been interested in very specifically New Mexican stories. And the story of Don Jose is based on a kind of rancho world where a rico, a rich man, who in this case is a sheep farmer, has a kind of loyalty to the workers and the world that he's in. This is not a story about migrant workers being oppressed by Anglo agribusiness in California. This is a story quite different, one that really has to do with New Mexico traditions and New Mexico history.
My discipline as a writer evolved from early training. I would write every morning, and I still do. I traveled to explore the world and ventured out to do readings, but I would always return to my home base. The old Hispanos and Indians of New Mexico knew that to be without a land base is to be cut away from the center of the universe.
This is a short reading from a book called A Chicano in China. Rudy went to China in May and June of 1984, and he wrote this beautiful little journal. China is not for the weak. The most unhurried day's journey can become a grueling experience. Our plane turned out to be an old converted cargo plane. The smiling hostess handed us a fan when we entered. Chinese air conditioning? If the plane from Xi'an to Zhongqing was an ancient relic, this one was a coffin. We sat in the sun while the plane was fueled. We said our prayers. We sweated. The plane did not fly, it groaned. I thought of the Royal Chicano Air Force, how at home they would be drinking beer, smoking mota, and piloting this crate around Aztlan. If you're going to call yourself a writer, you get up every morning, you pack your lunch in a little black box, and you go off to the steel mill. In a writer's case, you go off to your desk or whatever, and you write. And you do it 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year for 40 years. And that's what Rudy has been doing, you know? He writes.
Like Antonio in Bless Me Ultima, Rudolfo has learned to trust his instincts, his spiritual roots, and in that acceptance of the creative, he has given the world an intimate perspective of the Nuevo Mexicano experience.
There's a magnificent line here that to me epitomizes Rudy Anaya's soul, the depths of his feeling towards the earth. And it's on page 84 in Curse of the Chupacabra, his latest book. Now the night is growing old. The clouds have wrinkled the face of the moon. The wind calls and the coyotes answer. It is time to rest.
Funding for this program is provided by the College of Arts and Sciences, University of New Mexico, the Center for Southwest Research at University Libraries, University of New Mexico, and in part by New Mexico Arts, a division of the Office of Cultural Affairs and the National Endowment for the Arts. Funding for the 2007 Notable New Mexican Gala Celebration provided by the University of New Mexico and the First National Bank of Santa Fe.